Everybody, welcome back to Baton Talk on Thursdays with Tabitha. I am so glad y'all are joining me yet again. I don't take this moment for granted. Um, I know there is so much happening in terms of virtual connections, and so for you all to take time to be here, I truly appreciate it and I'm grateful. And today's a heavy subject, so for you all to tune in. I know it had to be intentional, and I'm grateful for that. So I will start off with, as I wait for people to join, I'll just kind of remind you of what Baton Talk is. If you're joining for the first time, welcome. I'm excited to have you. If you're always with us, welcome back. I appreciate the continued support and involvement and engagement so we can better our community, better ourselves, and do the work. And as you come in, please feel free to leave comments, reactions, responses, everything that is resonating with you, ideas, what you know about the topic, experiences, anything that comes to mind. It's a conversation, right? It's not Tabitha being an expert here. It's just me wanting to start a conversation and get us all involved. So, with that, I will start with my mission. My personal mission is to inspire the pursuit of healing. And with that, also to interrupt intergenerational cycles of trauma, of toxicity, just cultural things that no longer serve us. So, with that, it comes with different ways to achieve it. And one of the ways in which I thought I could achieve that to get people to talk about and pursue their own healing came from doing that for myself, which is why I believe I am the work and you are the work. So when you work on yourself, you're able to help others. And so another way that that came about was getting a lot of emails and phone calls and text messages of so many young people out here suffering in different ways and no support system, not because they don't have caring parents, not because they don't have friends, but because they don't feel like they have safe spaces to talk about mental health, to talk about trauma, to talk about the things that have been stigmatized. So when I saw that, I knew we had to start a conversation. And it's not easy to talk about the things that make you uncomfortable, the things that painful, but it has to be done in order for that to change, for cultures to change, for generations to change, and on the extreme side, for lives to be saved, right? So today we're talking a lot about mental health, suicide, cultural barriers. How can we support one another so that we do not have to attend another funeral of a young person ending their own lives for all the reasons that I've mentioned? And so, because of the topic we're talking about today, I do want to put a caution there that it will be heavy. So if you have kids around you, try to make sure they're not listening because some of this might be difficult to talk to if they're underage, or for yourself, if it's triggering, if you've had to support somebody going through this, or if you've lost somebody to suicide, this could be triggering. So I want to say that out loud that you know what is happening, that you can take care of yourself that way. All right. And so part of what I want to do to start is I want to make it a habit is just showing gratitude. We all need someone. Nobody makes anything happen by themselves. We don't get where we are by ourselves. And so, as part of that, to make this baton talk happen, I do want to thank Eric, who has been setting this up for me every week and has taught me how to do it myself for the first time today, and it's working. So, yay! Thank you, Eric. Rachel has continued to share and get questions and help me talk through what's important and what can work. Friends who have appeared here, those who show up every week, all of you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So that's my moment of gratitude. And then one other thing before I jump into it is the Baton Talk mission. Why do I do this every week? Like I mentioned, the idea behind the baton is that relay of life, right? You watch a relay, somebody's running really fast, they have a baton, they hand it over to the next person, that person takes off, and the cycle continues, but nobody ever stops to see what they have, what they've inherited, right? So the traumas we inherit from our parents, the um, ideas, the customs, the cultures, we all just keep taking and taking off in life until it's no longer working. So the reason for this is that we all take the time to look at what are those things, our experiences, our um, cultures and societies and norms, everything that we are holding that we might have passed on, or are passing on, not only to our kids, to our friends, everybody you engage with. You bring your energy, you bring your experience with you. So when you don't see what that is within you, you're more likely to pass on something unconsciously. So that's why we do the baton talk. And today with mental health, we know there's a huge genetic factor. So if you don't know that, or if you do know but you've not talked about it, then your children don't know what they've inherited, so they don't take the steps they need to heal. So that's the mission, and that's why we do the baton talk. And if it's your first time, go back and see some of the ones that we've done in the past, and we'll go from there. Okay, so as usual, we start with our quote of the day, and this week it is: awareness is the greatest agent for change. I'll say that again: awareness is the greatest change agent for change. So when we don't know what we don't know, we can't change it. And the minute somebody puts a light to it, now, even if you don't change it, at least you know what it is. And every time it happens, you're aware, and that changes everything. So, when it comes to mental health, when it comes to barriers and stigma, some people don't know how they're hurting others by what they say when it comes to this topic. So, awareness is everything. Um, and so, with that, I like to start off with a quick checking in mentally, physically, emotionally before we start. So I just don't bring in my daily stress. And then you also, as you're joining, take the time to we breathe together and we jump in fully present. So wherever you are, just sit back, lay back, however you're sitting, feel your feet on the ground, and just take one moment to check in with your mind. You might be busy and racing. Check in with your heart, your body. Maybe your shoulders are a little tense. Your back maybe has been hurting. Let your chair support it. And take 3 breaths with me. Breaths from deep within your diaphragm. So you should feel your stomach rise and not your chest. So you breathe in, hold it, and breathe out. Breathe in, hold, breathe out through your nose. And one last one, as you bring your presence and your awareness to your surroundings, to your mind, your heart, your body. Let's take one last breath together. Breathe in, hold, and breathe out, and release all the stress of the day. All right, thank you. Okay, so we're gonna start. And as I go, if you have something to say, there is a link that I am sharing in the chat room. Just click on that and I'll let you in so you can comment on video. If you have questions, put them in the chat room. If you have ideas, if you have whatever you want to add, either type it up if you're not comfortable or click on that link and come in and we can have a discussion. So, all right. Now with all of that prefacing, we can jump right into it. So today we're talking about, like I said, suicide, mental health, cultural barriers, stigma, that kind of stop a lot of people from seeking the help they need when they need it. And mental health has been with us for ages, right? But a lot of, I know my own culture, we never talked about it. And this is actually why I got into psychology. I don't think I've ever shared this on here, but I was in 10th grade, my first year in the United States. In Niles High School. I don't know anyone. This immigrant. I'm finding out for the first time that I have an accent, that I'm Black, that all these cultural things were coming at me. And I took a psychology class in high school, one of those when you take the AP classes, the college classes. And the first day, the teacher is talking about this is another way of healing, but it's the healing of the mind. And I had never heard of that idea. I didn't know what a psychologist was or what therapy was. And more classes I took, I started seeing these things that I had been, they talk about all the different disorders and all the behaviors that affect people, and knowing that the country I come from had just gone through a genocide, but nobody had talked about it. And this idea was just so fascinating to me. So from that day, I said, this is what I'm going to study. And since high school, that's all I've ever been interested in has been psychology. I have never tried to even see what else school has to offer. So undergrad, it was psychology. My master's was in clinical psychology, and I'm still in school after all these years. Um, but my real reason was I wanted to go back home and tell everybody. If it was like finding the gospel for me, right? It was like, wow, you can heal the mind. And I come from a culture that is silent about everything. We don't talk about real things. Even my family, I can't generalize like everything else. There's always that one family that's different than the other, or that one auntie who's open about things. But the family I grew up in and the community I grew up in, nobody tells you anything, but they tell you after the fact. So when I learned about this, that talking about things could actually heal someone, like through talk therapy, I wanted to share with everyone. And as soon as I finished my master's degree in 2009, 10 years ago, I went back to Rwanda. I knew that's why I studied psychology. I knew that's where I wanted to be. I don't know why I'm getting emotional. Um, so this, my people, this is why I do this. I've seen kids my age. Okay, I didn't see this coming. I've just seen us go through these processes all this time as you grow up, not having people to tell you what to expect, not knowing where to go for help. And we rely on each other, and yet we all don't have the answers, right? And the people who have gone through the things that we go through, they also don't have the resources, so they don't know how they can help us. And so that's what really pushes me to keep doing this. And I guess my tears are just from the pain that my people, or a lot of people, go through in isolation. And that silence is experienced by everyone. So everyone is suffering. And if we could only come together and share and help one another, it would lessen all the pain that people are going through. So that's why we're doing this, right? So when it comes to mental health, so many young people, older people who have gone through so many things are continuously struggling, and there's so much stigma around it. You hear things like people praying it away, right? Um, I'm a Christian. I believe in prayer and the power of prayer, the same way we pray for cancer and still go get chemotherapy. That's what we should do when it comes to mental health. I believe in just having space for people to express their pain without judgment. So when it comes to suicide, just this week I've heard of two young men that I don't know personally, but they've ended their lives. And we know that when that happens, the person is at that edge of hopelessness. They don't see another reason to live. And usually they feel like nobody will understand. And they feel like they can't turn somewhere else. And like I said, some of this is general. I'm generalizing. It's not the case for everybody. But I'll go through the different types. So the different kinds of risk factors that could bring this all about. So I'll start with statistics, right? We find in our look, so I'm accurate, it is the 10th leading cause of death. 10, right? And it is the second cause of death in ages 10 to 34. Can you imagine? And the first is accidental injury. So suicide is number 2 in kids as young as 10 to the ages of 34. It is the fourth leading cause of death in people ages 34 to 54. Um, More than 800, between 800,000 to 1 million people die a year due to suicide. I mean, if that's not alarming, I don't know what is. So why are we not talking about it? Why can't we say it by name so that people who are struggling can feel that it is okay to talk about it, right? Those are high numbers. And then there is, we know that men are 3 to 4 times more likely to complete a suicide, but women are more likely to attempt. And so, what that looks like is because men usually use more lethal terms to end their lives. There's a lot of gun use and hanging, and so they're more successful, 3 to 4 times more successful. And we know that statistically, women are more likely to have spaces to share this and spaces to go seek help than men. Even the language for it, you find that most men don't know how to talk about emotions. So when they start thinking or having suicidal ideations, they don't know how to make sense of that and don't have anywhere to go. And so they either that turns into um, the most comfortable emotion that men have access to is anger, that is socially accepted, or they isolate, and there is a lot of substance use. Um, Alcohol is one of the leading causes, not causes, but a risk factor. And so, what is this, right? What You can't say there's one thing that causes suicide, but there are a lot of risk factors that could contribute to it. And there are some that nobody has control over, such as your genetics. If someone in your family has ever committed suicide, it increases your chances, your children's chances, generations to come. You did nothing about that. You were just born in this family. And so part of talking about mental health is knowing that that's a risk factor for you. And so we know that culturally, actually, globally, it had been, and I looked into some history, and back in the old days in the Romans, it was acceptable for somebody to have that right to end their life. And then Christianity was introduced, and so different ideas around what that is started changing, where people were not saying the reason somebody ended their lives because they believed you're not going to go to heaven or you're being punished forever. Um, and then in, I think, 1863, in the Catholic Church, they changed that it was no longer, it was no, I can't remember how they say it in the Catholic Church, something along the lines, the different ways that you could earn heaven. I, anyway, it was changed, so I couldn't get the right wording there. Um, and so the history of the stigma around it started changing based on religious views and then cultural views. I just learned recently that in Uganda, when I was there and we're teaching about mental health, that when somebody tries to commit suicide and they're not successful, they put them in prison because they were harming their own bodies that belong to the government. And that really shook me. Like, how is that a solution? This person is obviously asking for help. So they put him in jail because your body and your health belongs to the government. And more to some other cultural practices of, if somebody knows that the the person committed suicide, that then their bodies cannot have a proper funeral. And I want for us to step back, because part of Baton Talk is unlearning some of the things we have been taught and we're practicing. If someone was so hopeless and in so much pain that the only solution, the only way they could see out of that is to end their own lives. And then first imagine the impact that has on the family. And now this family is being told this person can't have a proper send off, which they're already dealing with so much. And then there's a stigma where you hear people say things like it's selfish, people say things like they're weak of mind, or so many different things that are attached to this pain, this painful experience. And when you say those things out loud, Can you imagine the impact it's having for everybody around you? So then, if I'm having suicidal ideations, and this is how you're talking about the person we're sending off, I will never come and talk about it. I will never tell you about my pain because, first of all, it's already confusing enough and painful enough for the person going through it, where they wonder, how in the world would I even think to end my life? Why are these thoughts coming to me? And so when we understand the why, the mental health aspect that comes of it, the genetics, the risk factors, all right, we touched on the epigenetics part, the family history, and then you have the um, some of the developmental factors, like where how you grew up. There is personality traits and substance use. And then you have some life events that happen. So, like I said, the country I come from, we went through a genocide. People lost their whole families. They watched their parents, their children die in front of their eyes. That trauma alone is enough to make you feel hopeless. So, for everybody who has pushed through, it's not because they don't have their own struggles. There is that piece of, yes, Rachel says some people say they're possessed by a demon. Um, Trauma is correlated with suicidal risks, right? Somebody has to relive that because when that happens, when you go through such a traumatic experience, one, some of the symptoms that come after that is you're reliving that, right? Some people are having nightmares, sleep issues. Others turn to overuse of alcohol to numb the thoughts, the feelings, the memories of that. Some people are dealing with depression. Depression. Depression shows up differently for different people. And we don't talk about that either. But what do we talk about? So, when depression, how does that look like? People are not interested in the things they used to like. And chronic clinical depression, they actually say that most of us know the typical stereotypical depressed person. You're sad, you're lethargic, you maybe low appetite, withdrawn, all of that. And sometimes, most of the time, when the person is starting to come out of it, that's when they're more at risk of suicide. They have a little more energy. And so, when they're starting to get on the other side of depression and you see them more active and more um, energetic, that's usually the time to pay more attention to what that means for them. So, importance of ending stigma. One is awareness, educate ourselves. What is happening, right? That's part of what we're doing here. um, and warning signs, some of those signs are somebody talking about it, right? They might even pretend they're joking, but if someone says I could end my life, they're throwing out cues and clues to you to to have that conversation. It's a difficult conversation to have. I agree. Even for trained therapists, most of us, when you're supposed to ask that in the first session, that's the one big thing you have to ask. And so, even for us who are trained, you feel like, how can I ask anyone whether or not they are suicidal? But trust me, if somebody is experiencing that, and you're the one person who is blunt enough, kind enough, open enough, with no judgment, to say it like it is, have you had thoughts of ending your life? Straight up. You have no idea what that would do for the person because they feel like if you can call it out by name, you know what it is, you're not judging them, and you are open to having that conversation. But when we start to just do all of this the way we usually do it, what's wrong, walk it off, pray more. Maybe you don't have enough faith. Let's go shopping. Let's try to wish it away. Or if I ignore it, it will go away. It's not going to go away. Um, those thoughts, those behaviors, they just keep building up. So some people might start with self harm. In teenagers, those of you who deal with teenagers, sometimes it starts as most commonly nowadays, they cut. They make little cuts on their body to release um, and have that sense of to feel something. Some of them explain it that way, like I just wanted to feel something. So when you start seeing those self-injurious behaviors, they're not always are indication that the kids are suicidal, but they're risk factors. So if a child, a teenager, usually it's when it starts the most is in teenage girls, it's most common. And of course, mostly they do in places you can't see. So that comes back to that open conversation with your children. And now with social media and access to um, the internet, they literally have groups for themselves to talk each other through how to do it, um, how to cut safely, how to best way to commit suicide, all of that. So be open to talk about these things. Um, so some of the warning signs, like part of that, those signs of clinical depression I talked about, you know your people, you know your tribe. When you see changes, check in openly, not the whole, oh, how are you? Good, good. Okay, just wanted to say hi. Or let's go get a drink. Oh, you look great. Most of us do those every day, and each one goes home with all this heaviness of I wish somebody could just ask me. Um, and you'd be surprised how many people are willing and ready and able to open up when if we just asked. So there's a sadness and hopelessness, and the hopelessness is the biggest part of when person uh, finally decides to go through with it, because most people think about it way before, for a long time before they ever do something about it. The three parts is like a diagram of the risk factors, the things that could determine whether or not somebody's going to do it, right? Their sense of being a burden to their family, to their loved ones, to their community, that feeling of not belonging, like thwarted belongingness. They don't feel like they belong in any one group, that nobody really cares that much. Nobody would miss me if I was gone. I am too much trouble. I am not good enough. I'm unworthy. I didn't live up to these standards. And that comes back to the whole competition and comparisons and that we talked about in previous sessions. So when they have the perceived burdensomeness, they feel like they're a burden to community, to their parents, and they don't belong. And then that coupled with access to our capacity to complete a suicide, that's where really it happens. So what can you do for that, right? It's being that reaching out, that openness, that being able to say to your people. And I know I keep saying I'm mainly talking from my experience as a Rwandan, but this goes across. I Suicide knows no color, knows no country. It is a global issue, and to this day, everybody's still talking about let's end stigma around this. So yes, more risk factors always to warning signs and risks. So we talked about the depression and the signs of that, the change in energy and self-esteem, negative comments about self-worth. That's a thing when people start to put themselves down. Um, I have, I can't remember who I was listening to, but I've started being more forward with that, where I will not let the person go through with that conversation with me. Because some people put themselves down, so they beat you to it, they beat the other person to it, or that's really how they feel about them. But I will not be the person to participate in it. So I'm starting to, and if I'm not doing a good job, call me out, letting people know or stopping them from using that kind of talk. And I don't know who did the saying that says, don't say even if you're just joking, but when you say negative things about yourself, your spirit doesn't know the difference. So what you feed your spirit, what you say about you, we talked about the I am, the word you put after I am can create your reality. So when you see people starting to do that, or even just calling that out, could make all the difference. um, and so previous suicide attempts, that's always a tell, that's a big tell. But sometimes you don't know, especially if these are adults that kind of have a different life than you're able to see. um, some people start getting their personal affairs in order. They start talking about, I would like for this to go to this person. Some people give stuff away. Um, if they have families, they could make a will. They could just make sure that things are where they need to be. Those are different signs that you can see, okay, this person is going on. And most of the time, we think that a person who commits, and actually, you can see now more than ever, thanks to social media and more sharing of stories. Um, Most of the time you're going to hear, oh, they were the life of the party. He was always so happy. This person was always this and so active. I mean, we've seen celebrities every day. Robin Williams was a comedian, for God's sake. His job was to make everybody happy, and he was miserable with depression. And we see people from the outside, we're like, wow, I want that life. And they seem to be living the perfect life. So it's not always, you're not looking for the sad person. There are all these other signs that are going on, and sometimes there's nothing you could do, because there's so much you can. If somebody decides to do this, they are going to do this. But those who could be saved early on, so knowing this, opening up a conversation, ending stigma, and identifying mental health. I'm a true believer that everybody should have a mental health check-in the way we do our physicals. We should all have. I know it's hard to it's expensive, but depending on where you live, it's probably you don't have access to many therapists, but there's so many online tools as well that nowadays, and there are people who could there are services that are on a sliding fee scale, but everyone should get that check in. Because when things build up, when you've gone through personal traumas, some that are passed on to you that you don't even know you've gone through, because most of us don't know our history. Um, I don't know my grandparents, any of them. I didn't grow up with a single grandparent. My grandfather on my dad's side, I saw when I was a child, but I don't know anything about him. I know nothing on my mom's side. So when I go to a doctor and they're asking me about any cancers in my medical history, I'm like, I don't know. Same with our mental health. We don't know. Um, and so we have to be really intentional in taking care of ourselves, our children, and those we love, and those near us. Um, we need to normalize that, to normalize talking about it, call it and name it, because then shame really thrives on silence. So anytime we can put our finger on and call something by name, we take the power back. So we can take the power back, so people who need the help can come to us when before it's too late. They can seek help before it's too late. And our words so strong. Our words have meaning. They could change and could end a life. So the stigma and the things we say um, when these things happen could really determine whether or not someone else seeks help or give up. So we have to pay attention to that. So I feel like I've been going at 100 miles per hour here. I'm passionate, obviously, as you can tell. So, for those with any questions, any experiences, anything you see that you resonate with in your own culture, and there are intersections of barriers, right? We have the religion piece, where people feel like, oh, it's a sin and this and that. And so that stops them from asking, right? So, what barriers have you seen in your own communities and how they could be overcome? Um, any questions around depression? So, there are different disorders that could contribute to this, that would be a whole different conversation. But mainly, we hear about depression being a big risk factor. Schizophrenia, people could have hallucinations, and where they're literally hearing voices telling them to kill themselves. And yeah, so if you have any questions, throw them in there. If anybody wants to jump on, let me know. Or if any therapists out there that want to add onto with their experience, you can also jump on. So I want to get into how to help. Um, the biggest way is the first one we talked about, opening up. Let Ask people directly. If you see any of the risk factors I've mentioned, reach out. Even if you don't, just talk to people openly, right? How I started asking my kids, now instead of just saying, "How are you doing? How was your day?" We check in and like, "Okay, how's your heart?" And because they're kids and they're still open, they will say, "Oh, it's hurting." Like, "Oh, what happened?" And then that opens a conversation into whatever heart her hurts that day. And how's your mind? And how's your body? And so a lot of us are afraid of these conversations. One, because we think we don't know how to have it. Some people may be afraid to find out of what could be shared. Some of us feel like maybe ignorance is bliss. So if I don't know, it's not happening. I see what you're saying. Do you have suggestions on how to have this conversation within the church? Do we do it on Sunday or in small groups? Does the pastor do this? So let's remember. Oh, good one. Yeah, because religion, church is big, right? It's big in most of our communities, and it's very generalizing. Stereotypically, it is very silent on these issues because our understanding or what I keep hearing when it comes to mental health is just pray about it, right? People want to pray depression away. They want to pray whatever, all mental illnesses really. Um, and so, how do we do it? Yes, pastor leadership is, if leadership can do that first and have a day to talk about what that looks like, um, and the importance. Pastors are rarely counselors. Here and there, you'll find one who's trained, but a lot of people go to their pastors for mental health help. That is not okay. So, as leaders, pastors should be up there also advocating for this openness, for seeking professional help. You go to a pastor for spiritual help, you go to a psychologist, a social worker, a therapist, of any counselor for mental health help. So they can help you find that. They cannot counsel you um, to healing. So that's one thing, right? So it could start there where the pastor him or herself can talk about that. I believe very strongly in small supportive groups where people feel, one, that their information is confidential. Confidentiality is so huge and such a big barrier to why young people, anybody really that talks to you, feel like if I come to you and reveal to you the most vulnerable, scary part of my experience, and then the next day I hear it all over the community, I'll feel betrayed. So the only way to keep myself safe from that betrayal, I will not um, tell anyone. Um, so small groups can help when there is that sense of confidentiality, because a lot of churches, everybody knows everybody, and then there is that idea of, if I speak about it in this group and then the next minute somebody else, the whole church is going to be, or the pastor is going to be calling me in, or I'll be looked at as, because some people still use all those phrases like you're mad, you're crazy, or mad, back home, abasazi. Um, and it's an illness. It is not being crazy. So my experience, you ask my experience. So a lot of my experience, I worked in crisis services for 4 years, 4 or 5 years, where I was receiving people who either were caught, who were found trying to attempt suicide, from jails, from emergency rooms, from in their homes, children, adults, old people. I mean, all ages. And nobody wants to end their lives. That's one thing. Like, everybody, by the time they get to that point, they are desperate. There is real pain behind that. And when they are brought in, um, it is a struggle. It is a struggle to come back to feeling okay. So for me, it's that I see Tabitha here. Said this, there's a great book discussing mental health with regard to the church for anyone. Grace for the afflicted. All right, never read that one. Okay. There you go, Rich, for your church. Get that book. Um, so yeah, that's one thing about mental health. Everybody is trying to thrive and survive and see another day. But when they feel hopeless, when they feel they lack support, um, it gets to that point that they no longer can hold on to what's left. And so with that, we have 20 minutes of it, and I thought, how do we get help if somebody actually finally talks to us and they say they need support or that they are experiencing this? What do you do? How do you talk to them? And so I thought I would invite somebody um, who currently works. Oh, I'm sorry, there's one more question that I missed. Thanks, Rich. And in our community, as Africans, the kids see their parents as authoritarian rather than people they can talk to. How can we address this issue? Oh, that's a good one. How did I miss that? Yes, that is huge. How do we address this? So I think, personal opinion. So if any defenses are going up, maybe look at the defenses instead of what we're discussing. Um, One, this is not to blame the parents. We do what we've seen modeled. And most of our parents grew up in such households, and every generation is trying to do better. So they grew up with parents most of them, whose only job was to provide. So if I get you in school and make sure you can eat and you sleep and you graduate, my job is done. This whole extra of I love you, of let's spend time together was fluff, right? They didn't have the leisure to do that, generalizing. And so then the next generation, for each generation, it was getting better and better. They're learning to do better by their children. And so now for the immigrants, now they have what they saw modeled as parenting was telling your children what to do, keep them on the straight and narrow so they can finish school, become successful. And that was usually your ticket out of poverty for those who grew up in poverty. So that was their only goal. And then you have to realize for your own self how you parent. What is that say about you? Most of us, we do things for two reasons as parents, whether we didn't get it and we would have wanted it as children, or that's what we got, and either for whatever reason, that's what we know. Oh, like we survived, however you frame that. And so I can say for me, or what I've seen, and we were discussing this, is my mom hustled, like she worked hard. We rarely spent time with her one on one. And for her motivation was her children have to get an education because she didn't, because her parents couldn't afford to. So for whatever it's gonna take, that was her goal. That was her value of parenting. She was gonna make sure we had an education, we had options that she didn't get. And my dad, on the other hand, he grew up in a family where he lost his parents, separated at a young age, had a terrible stepmom, terrible experience growing up. And then his value was, I'm going to be close to my kids come what may. And so he was the one always giving us the talks. Or for an African dad, he cooked for us from day one, even in back home where no man got in the kitchen. He would take us on walks. He would do all these things that most fathers never did because that's what he never got, right? So that's kind of what I mean. So for parents nowadays, they don't, when they come to the United States, and now children are seeing a different example of what a parent-child relationship looks like from TV, from their friends, from all of that. And our parents only know what they saw was, I'm going to provide for you and give you a better life. So they started giving them a better life by getting them to a country of opportunities. What more do you want? I brought you to America. I am working 10 jobs to make sure you have the life that I didn't get so you can succeed and live a good life. So they feel like that's it. That's important. And another thing is comparing pain. That has been coming up a lot, and I feel like I'm getting off topic, but it's important that I say this because I saw a very big name preachers say this about children nowadays who have everything they need. I think the words he used was they eat fries and mayonnaise or whatever. What problems do they have to complain about? And so we have parents who grew up in such hard times and survived and are resilient. Some of them grew up as refugees. Some of them they got to see the genocide and experience losing everyone they knew, or moved to a whole other country where they didn't know anyone. And or every generation, right, it's doing better by their kids. So in the US, you see black parents who three generations removed from slavery and Jim Crow and all of that. And then when they see their kids say they're depressed, like, what you got to complain about? We walked to school, or we did this, whatever you did that was so difficult. You start comparing that to your children's pain now and invalidating their experience. And we don't see is that your pain, your trauma was already transferred to them. So they're also holding that. And we're seeing a lot of depression in kids who are born post genocide, born post Holocaust. Even generations later now in the Jewish community, they still see these influences because the things you built up within you to survive, to be here now, do what you're doing. You have some walls around you that helped you. And then now those are informing how you parent, how you communicate, how you love, how you express that. My mom could never say I love you to save her life. If she did, it would have to be a joke and she'll crack up so hard and like, ha ha ha, you happy now? Because how would you know that? Most parents didn't experience that. So what is that going to take to answer Ant's question? It's going to take vulnerability. It's going to take working on yourself, because most parents, in my experience, how I grew up and how I see we do in my community, they want to change the kids. They want to tell them what to do, what they're doing wrong, what they're doing right, but they're not stepping into that healing for themselves as well. So I think where to begin is by sharing or getting in touch with your own stuff. And again, like I said, I'm generalizing here. Some parents are not doing this. This is general terms. So a lot of them have to, one, we would love to hear your stories. If a parent, you don't start by asking kids about their lives, their secrets, if you have to model what you want to be seen. Remember, we're reflections of each other. Children are going to do what they see, not what they're told. So you can start that by modeling. What does that look like to live with someone whom I want to share and be open with? How that looks like for you, that's what you're going to have to be in order for your child to be that back to you. Another question I see, what could be the case? It's not just authoritarian parenting, also permissive parenting, which I think is most the case. So there's a good point. So it's not one way or the other. It is the why behind it. Yeah. So any kind of parenting could lead to somebody closing off. But that's where it comes back to you doing your own work. Why are you being a permissive parent? Why are you being an authoritative parent? Sometimes there's that guilt. And a lot of immigrant parents have a lot of barriers that some other parents don't have. So some of them don't know the language very well when they move here. Some of them have to work a lot. And then they feel this guilt that they're not doing the things that maybe they see their coworkers do for their kids. And that could create that permissiveness, even when you know it's not good for your child, because you feel like, oh, how could I have any rules when I'm not there? How could I? All of that. So why? Asking yourself the why behind the behaviors. So again, coming back to doing the work yourself before you're expecting your children to do it. That internal awareness of why you do what you do. There's this parenting class I took workshop called Love and Logic. And one of the things that I remember really resonated with me, it was having your own parenting. So if you're starting a business, how you have a mission, values, objectives, purpose, right? So as a parent, creating that for yourself and then walking, knowing what you want out of this. So you want an open relationship with your child. What are the steps you need to take first for yourself? Because if you've never seen it done, you have to learn and you have to unlearn what you have seen. So if you're being a permissive parent and you know that's kind of where the issue is coming from, having that honest dialogue first with yourself, your spouse, or partner if you have one, and then your child. Kids are so resilient, kids are so smart, and then when they're older, of course, it becomes a different conversation. But that vulnerability of telling your child, I don't know what I'm doing, most of us don't know what we're doing, we're all just figuring it out as we go, or just saying, I'm really struggling with this because my parents, for whatever reason, this and this and this. I've had that conversation with my kids about yelling, because that's how I saw things done. If you want something done, you have to yell. And I've taught them not to yell at each other, yet that's what I do when I want something done. So what are they going to do when they want something done? They start screaming at each other. So I said, you know what? I am sorry. I don't like doing that. It is not okay to raise your voice at someone, and I'm working on it. And so you all can help me work on it, because we're all just, so there's this piece of where we think as parents we're superior, we are better than, we have it all figured out. And because we put up that front to our children, then that's one of the walls that block us from creating that relationship. So when they know you're vulnerable enough to own your weaknesses or the parts of you that you're improving, so that helps them also then feel like it's okay to feel vulnerable, it's okay to feel weak sometimes, however that is looked at. It's okay to feel sad, and definitely okay to talk about it. And more than anything, okay to ask for help. Asking for help is a strength, not a weakness. So, speaking of asking for help, I am going to invite a friend of mine who works for a crisis line right now to give us some extra skills, resources on what you can do to get help, and what to expect, right? So we know there's some numbers you can call, and we know there are all these different ways. If you could join on, there's the link in my chat room, Tabitha. So we know there are numbers you can call, but some people are feeling like, oh, I don't know what to expect. What are they going to do for me? What if they call my mom? Let's say you are a young person and you don't want your parents to know yet, or you're a parent and you don't know what to do. You see the signs, your child won't open up, and you are scared. So what do, right? So she's going to walk us through what to expect when you call those numbers, and also any other ideas that come from her experience. And her name is Tabitha too. So welcome. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay,
So
perfect.
can you help us understand, if I were to call, what do I expect? What do you see in your experience?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm so excited that you're talking about this important topic today, because I think it is something that's so shrouded in silence and in stigma. And there are resources that exist exactly for helping us kind of talk about that more, because it is something that is so silenced in our communities and is grained into us when we even, ask that question of saying that word, suicide, of that, that aversion that we feel in our body, that's that cultured, silence around it. And when somebody calls in, really our biggest goal at the line that I work at, it's called the Lifeline, and it's something that is a national number for the United States. So anywhere that somebody calls into the Lifeline, they'll reach a local crisis center. And one of the biggest things that we talk about when somebody is new to the line or learning how to be a crisis worker is we talk about making space for someone. And I can't emphasize enough that point that Tabitha talked about earlier, of this failed belongingness and this lack of connection to our community, that our most important point of the line is, how can I make space for this person's pain? And thinking about us as, as loved ones, as family members, as parents, as, friends, sisters, brothers, that, that can also be our goal when we're talking to someone, is how can I make space for this person's pain, that I can be their community connection in this moment, that as they're sharing this, that I can make space for this pain and I can talk to them. So for us as individuals who, are not just making space for this pain for other people, but are also people who struggle as well. And me speaking as someone who both is now working at a crisis line and has struggled with suicide myself, that being able to speak out that pain and to reach out for help is so, so important. And doing our own work and being willing to reach out for those resources is also important. So when we're talking about reaching out for help, when you call the Lifeline, you'll get connected to a crisis worker who's going to take the lead based on you. So they're going to be looking for what you want to share. What is it that you want to make space for? And also that, this is a conversation with another person, and that whatever you want to share, or in whatever way you want to have that conversation, that's up to you. That, they're looking to help you feel connected and to feel safe and to bring you to a place of being able to feel safe. So the biggest goal when you call the line is that person is trying to help get you through that peak time of crisis. So oftentimes we find that people who, are dying by suicide, that they have likely thought about this in the past, and yet that with suicide, we see these peak times of risk, that somebody may be struggling with this ongoing depression, but that they have these peak moments of hopelessness where they feel like there isn't another solution to their pain. And that oftentimes when we talk about suicide prevention, our biggest thing is, how do I get that person? How do I help them get through just this peak moment of risk to make it to that next moment and ultimately help them get connected? So we might talk about things like, can you call the line during those moments? Can you reach out to the Lifeline? Do you have a trusted friend? What can you do for this moment until this peak risk passes? Can you work out? Can you watch a movie? Can you do breathing and like those, beautiful meditation exercises that Tabitha's brought into the space of these conversations? What can we do to get you through this peak time? So that first piece is getting that person through that peak time of risk. And then that second piece is, how do we get ourselves, or how do we get our loved ones connected to something? Whether that be, connected to their community, connected to that support, and also connected to that, longer term mental health support. And that could be, getting resources in our communities. That could also be, if we're not sure, where do we start? I know one resource that until I started working at the agency that I'm at, I had no idea what 211 was. And it's something that's similar to 911, where if you call those 3 numbers, you get directed to your local resource line. And one of the resources that they have is connecting people to low cost counseling options in their area, of how do we get connected to that next step once that peak moment of crisis passes.
Wow, thank you so much. And thanks for sharing your part two. Anybody has a question for Tabitha before we wrap up, you can put it in the chat room. But I wanted to follow up real quick with that, on the crisis. You talked about the peak moments. What could you suggest, and could you give one intervention right now if a friend of mine is going through that time, but they're not comfortable calling? What could I do to support them if I'm with them in the moment?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is really, if we are in that moment that they aren't yet comfortable about reaching beyond us, it can be so extremely scary to have somebody tell us, I'm thinking about ending my life. And there's a lot of emotional reactions within ourselves that we'll be having of, I love this person. Why are they saying this to me? Sometimes there could be anger at, why do they want to leave me? And there's a lot of emotional reactions that we'll have, and that we need to process too, that this is scary for us as well. But that in that moment, the biggest thing I would say is trying to find out, how can I make space and let this person know that we are connected in this moment. And sometimes the best way to do that, particularly when we're scared, is how can I reflect back what they're saying? How do I let them know that I hear what they're saying? So if they're saying, I feel hopeless, I feel like I don't want to be here anymore, then, saying, that sounds incredibly painful. I hear you that you are overwhelmed right now. I hear you that you are in pain. And knowing that oftentimes when people are thinking about suicide, it's not actually that they want to die, that there's these competing parts of I'm in pain and I don't know how to solve that pain, but I want to no longer be in pain. And that's actually what it is, that this brain trying to rack for how do I not be in pain. So that's the biggest thing that I would say is how do I let them know that we are connected in that moment, that I hear their pain. And it could be affirming the emotions that you're hearing. It could be, just asking, how can I support you right now? How can I let you know that I love you, that I am so glad that you told me, of really just finding every way that we can to let that person know that we are connected right now in your pain.
That is so good. That's perfect, because most of us naturally we want to offer solutions. We want to help our friend, the people we love, not be in that pain. And so first, with our own discomfort, our first response is, "Don't say that," or finding solutions on how I can stop you from feeling what you're feeling. And so that is so key. It's one, learning to sit with your own discomfort, because in this moment, it's not about you. And what you just said, just reflection is so easy to remember. If you feel like you have nothing profound to say in that moment, just just be there, present. Thank you. That's absolutely beautiful and helpful. So I know we're on top of our any other last minute wise, anything else you can think of that would be helpful? I see this question, and maybe you might have something to say about it, given your professional experience and personal. What about young adults who are no longer children, pretending to be open, but they are not? How do we get them to be open?
I think that what Tabitha was saying earlier, of the conversation is happening even when we don't know that the conversation is happening, of what we say about mental health, what we say about suicide, that person is testing the waters. So that joke that they just made, I think a lot of times we're kind of coming to this place of, people are saying, well, that's wrong to make jokes about that. But at the same time that it may not be disrespectful in what they're doing, that they're testing the waters to see how we react. And I think that part of that, how do we get people talking about it, is that part of it is we start being this change of this context for people to say, I'm here for the conversation. That when, somebody is, that when we see somebody who died by suicide, that, we might say, I wish that, that person had shared that with just one other person. I wish that they had a context for that pain. If I had someone in my life who I knew was going through that pain, I would want them to tell me. And we also do it by, like Tabitha said earlier, being direct, by being willing to name that, to say, not just, are you thinking of harming yourself? Are you thinking of doing something bad? We say, have you ever thought about, ending your life? When people are sometimes overwhelmed, that might be something that they're thinking about. Is that there for you? And I think that the more we make those conversations normalized parts of our culture, the more it doesn't have to be this, this silenced killer anymore, of this silent, alone suffering anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So one, we practice what we preach. We are also open about what's going on. We should be open about, so if these conversations have been happening, then when I experience it for the first time, I know that I can talk about it. So that's one way. That's one of the ways. And of course, what you just said, and making that a common conversation and naming it. We just have to name things for what they are. I know we struggle that so much when it's difficult dialogues, but until we do that, we're continually going to be suffering in silence. And every time it happens, how could I didn't see that coming, or this, so we're all surprised every time, but we're not. We know it's happening, so why not talk about it?
Mm.
Thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us your expertise and wisdom and how to. So we'll reach out if we have any more questions. If people, because most people watch after the fact, then we will reach out for more answers. Thank you so much, Tabitha. Twin. All
Thank
right.
you so much for having me.
Wonderful. So, all right, we're on top of the hour, everybody. I hope this was helpful, or at least we'll start a conversation. I am thinking to do 2 more shows to get a little bit deeper in this. So, for next week, I am hoping to find people who have had personal experience and have overcome this so they can walk us through what they felt and what helped and how can we help each other. um, there's one more comment. I think there is a belief myth that talking about it directly will make it worse, but we need to name it in order to help. Yes, exactly. We always think if we will ignore it away and everything will be better, and now we see that 1 million people die each year. 1 million. It's not going away. And it's our kids, it's our sisters, it's our neighbors, it's people in pain. And if the least we can do is make space for one another, really, we can do that. So when we know better, we do better. Let's continue to do the work within, so it can also come out into our communities, and we can break this generational cycle of toxicity, of trauma, and survive and thrive together. So thank you all for making time to be here. Next week, same time, 7 p.m. on a Thursday. Tell somebody, invite somebody. Hopefully, we'll have people sharing their own experiences. And then after that, we will have a couple other therapists share different ways to take care of your mental health and to check in with yourself. Then we will be ending our season with that, so we can have. I'll take a month off and return with more ideas on what could be helpful in our community and for all of us to do the work, so we can create the world that we want to see, that we want our children to live in, that is more kind and um, cultivating more love, community, awareness, kindness, and healing, more importantly. So, thank you again for being here. And I hope you got something out of it. Share with others. Subscribe if you're not subscribed on here, and invite others to subscribe. And let's continue to learn together, grow together, and heal together. Have a wonderful weekend. Thanks, guys.